Hi, my name's Nielsen,
I'm Damien.
and today we're going to be talking about the Americanization of Japan. Japan is a diverse culture that has been around for millennia at this point, with very strict morals and values. However, during the past, let's say,
50.
60 years, that's kind of changed. So today we're going to be talking about how after the atomic bombing of Japan, Americans' culture influence over it in a creative and permanent way that has affected its political systems, armies, its artistic depictions, its sports, and even to the food they consumed. You want to start off with Japan and how we got to this point?
Yeah, so Japan lost World War II, shocker. And
Crazy.
It's kind of weird how they surrendered, because two sides claim two different things. On one hand, you have the civilian government with the emperor who claims only the atomic bombings were the reason for their surrender. And the civilian government surrendered before the military.
Yeah.
Because there were remnants of the military still in China, Manchukuo, and across the islands that they controlled that refused to surrender. And they only surrendered once the Soviets invaded because it invalidated what they called Ketsugo.
Yeah.
Ketsugo was Japan's final attempt to draw out a conditional surrender. Because at this point, Japan knew that they lost. But they wanted a conditional surrender where they could keep some privileges, some powers, like, for example, keeping the emperor as the emperor.
Yeah.
And their idea to solve this was basically bleed the Allies dry. Because at the time, the Soviets weren't at war with them.
Yep.
So, America learned at Midway that Japan will fight to the bitter end.
Yeah, which is why we dropped not only one, but 2 and 3 days apart.
Yeah.
And a big misconception that people have is that Japan receded very quickly after both atomic bombs were dropped. No, they actually, the actual emperor and the military actually said that they're basically going to be gone from the military, or from militarization, on August 15th. The first bomb was dropped April 6th of 1945.
Because after the atomic bombings, the Army and Navy, in their mind, it was, this doesn't matter, this doesn't invalidate Ketsugo. And Ketsugo was the idea of, if the Americans land, we will fight to the bitter end and kill as many Americans as we can and bleed them dry and force them to for us to offer conditional surrender.
Yep.
Because it'd be too costly to take the home islands. Now, the idea of Ketsugo was invalidated when the Soviets attacked. Because now there's an entire third country with reserves of millions of men ready to pour into Japanese land, which invalidates the idea of bleeding the Allies dry.
Yeah.
So the civilian government claimed it was the atomic bombs, while the military claimed it was a Soviet invasion that caused the surrender.
Yeah.
But anyways, Japan surrendered and U.S.
Yeah, on officially September 2nd of 1945, and the United States also pardoned the emperor every single one of the war crimes.
And the royal family.
Yeah, and the royal family, but only them. Those were the only people that were pardoned.
And America occupied the entirety of Japan, while other countries that participated didn't because they were broke.
Yeah, basically, and they were also paying back many loans to America. So, enough about other countries. Let's go over what Americanization in Japan really started, which would have been with the Reconstruction period of Japan. After the war, allies, mainly the United States, of course, helped make reforms inside of the Japanese government, which basically they militarized Japan, dealt with all the colonies of Japan, and tried to stabilize the economy of Japan after the war, which was left in shambles.
Yes. Because here's the thing, their entire industry was destroyed.
Yep.
Because the Japanese home island doesn't have a lot of minerals or natural resources, which is why they expanded to these colonies in Korea and the islands and China, was to get these resources that they need. And a lot of their buildings were made of wood. So if you look at pictures, you can look at a picture of Hiroshima and a picture of Tokyo.
Yeah.
Tokyo was just firebombed with basically napalm, while Hiroshima was
dropped a bomb into
an atomic bomb, and they look exactly the same.
Anything, Tokyo looks worse if you actually look at the pictures. I'll show some pictures on screen for people who are listening to this, not in an audio recording, right? Yeah,
It looks horrible, basically,
Yeah.
and they had no industry whatsoever. They needed to completely rebuild.
Yep. So, actually, the beginning phase of the Reconstruction, there's actually 3 phases. So first we have the phase between 1945 and 1949, where basically immediately the United States, as we talked about already, set trials for all the war crimes committed by the military expansion of Japan, right? The military and the expansion of it. So, minus the emperors, which, just to be honest, should have been the first ones to do it, but they kind of did that to try to stabilize a formal relationship with Japan.
And also, the imperial family was strictly anti-communist.
Yeah.
And they'd be a great help in the upcoming Cold War. As well as replacing the emperor would make the successor look like an American puppet and loosen Japanese faith. Because in their state religion, Shintoism, the emperor is seen as a child of the sun god. As like their main deity, basically.
Yep. And not only that, also with that, kind of in a way now what emperors will look like in Japan is how the British look at the royal family. That's the best way I can describe it.
As like a national celebrity.
Yeah.
What's going on?
Okay, yeah. No, just making sure it was recorded. I'll take that part out. Yeah. So, basically that happened for a while. And in September, specifically of 1945, SAP, S-C-A-P, Supreme Command of Allied Powers, led by General Douglas MacArthur. Yeah, MacArthur. That's how you want to say it, even though it's spelled literally Mac. Basically, that was a force that demilitarized all of Japan, banned all of the officers that were in the military to even serve in the government, right? That same program also introduced land reforms to benefit specifically Japanese farmers, and reduce the power of the rich, who were the advocates for the expansion. Like how most revolutions basically start, it's always
the aristocrats.
Rich versus poor. So it's like the rich always try to.
You gotta realize with this, right?
Yeah.
And the banning officers from government positions, the Second Sino-Japanese War started because Japan's civilian government couldn't control the military.
Yeah.
They caused the Marco Polo Bridge incident, which caused the Second Sino-Japanese War.
Yeah, and that lasted, I think it was...
Until their end, until their surrender.
Yeah, which was, what, decades? Almost...
A little bit less.
Okay.
Because the Sino Second started slightly before World War II.
Yeah. So, right, that happened. On top of that, during the second phase, right? Oh, yeah, sorry. Before I go on to the second phase, they set up a parliament in Japan. They made sure that the emperor had no powers, you already mentioned. And something I actually didn't realize, they actually advocated for greater rights for women, which is kind of what was happening in America at the time. And they also renounced the right to war of Japan forever. They still have not reclaimed it.
Constitutionally forbade it.
Yeah. And they also don't have it in the military. And we're very, very keen on making sure that's the case.
It's actually pretty interesting how they gave Japan a parliament instead of a congress like how we have. Because we sort of injected their new government and we modeled it after the British government. They have a Westminster-style parliament.
I think it was mostly due to just the population density. You look at the amount of land that America had control over versus the amount of land that Japan had control over. It was very small, which I feel like is why they actually chose parliamentation instead of
But like their National Assembly, which is called the National Diet, is a parliament styled like the British Parliament instead of a Congress with a Senate and a House.
Yeah, which is something that is kind of interesting to think about. But they also have a constitution
modeled
after the United States.
It's kind of weird how it's a mix of both.
Yeah. Well, I mean, British did have at least some influence at the beginning during the Reconstruction, but then afterwards
they pulled out because they were broke.
Yeah. So second phase, which was between the years of 1947 and 1948, was for occupation, was to increase literally just a rehabilitation of the entire country, that to not be influenced by the communist movements, which we have already talked about. But at the same time, because of the economic crisis, we were even more worried that this would happen. And this entire scandal / movement was called the reverse course for Japan. And that lasted till 1950. So the way that this was addressed was things like tax forms and inflation, and the inflation happening in the country being suppressed. However, the main issue for Japan during that time when it came economically was their material shortage. To be able to feed the industries in there for like goods, weaponry, things like that to sell to other countries. Yeah, to sell to other countries as well. However, that mostly changed during the Korean War because of SAP. SAP took advantage of it during the war and basically said, we're going to have our bases here, you're going to give us supplies, and we're going to fuel your economy, right? Or not SAP, but SCAP, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have anything else to add to that?
It's actually pretty interesting too, because at the same time, the U.S. was also funding the reconstruction of Europe as well with the Marshall Plan.
Yeah.
And they had their own like custom version for Japan specifically too.
I think that is mostly because, unlike the Allied powers, which are already victorious and kind of on the side of democracy minus Soviet Union, of course. Japan was completely different. We were just trying to eliminate
rebuilding them.
Everything of Japanese culture, which has affected it currently, which is also
but we still injected a lot of like capital into them, sort of like a Japanese Marshall Plan.
I mean, it worked. It really did.
They had a very big economic boom.
Yep, which we actually will be talking about here when we get later into the sections. Then after the war and after SCAP taking advantage of this, began Phase 3. Phase 3 is where America was basically like, we demilitarized Japan. They basically have no threat to us. They can't do anything to us. So they tried to basically say, okay, what we'll do is we'll protect you with the U.S. defense, right? They said this as a peace treaty. This was really the final aspect of it, because after this, the United States have never feared Japan again.
Tied Japan to the U.S. basically.
Yeah, basically, if Japan doesn't want to get invaded by other countries, it will stay with the U.S. That's what this peace treaty said. The peace treaty was signed on September 1951, in which the United States has bases in Okinawa and other places, and would defend Japan in a security pact. And in the same September, 52 nations met in San Francisco to discuss the treaty, and 49 of them signed. I think the only ones that didn't sign were USSR, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia.
For communist states, basically.
Yeah, I can double check that. Let's double check that first, right?
Because those are three countries that were, well, besides Yugoslavia, which wasn't in the Iron Curtain.
Sorry, no, it was Poland, not Yugoslavia.
Yeah, those are all Iron Curtain
But
states.
it was Czechoslovakia and USSR, and that was because China they basically said no to China, which is what they weren't really comfortable with dealing with at the time, and still really aren't. Yeah. So, any other thoughts before we go on to our next section?
No, we can move on.
Okay. This is, I think, the most obvious portion of the section of showing American influence is with their culture, with their arts and their music, which is, out of basically every single other country, a big portion of their culture. So, let's start first with the art. Japan, after the Reconstruction period, was still left in some shambles, especially with its identity. And that led the Western world to just start influencing them. And you can also feel the despair of Japan with their manga at the time. Works like The Drifting Classroom, which was these children who were sent to an apocalyptic future due to something that happened to their school. And basically the tyranny and all the mess up things that happened, right? During that time, right? And it also showed the remnants of Japan even in the 1972 to 1974, which is when the serialization happened, how much fear they had over the bombings, that they made an entire story of it, and it resonated with the people. It won awards. Then another example, which is one of my favorite examples and a great story to read, is Tomorrow's Joe, Shista no Joe, which was released between the years 1968 and 1973. This is a character that showed a bright man, right, that went from rags to riches, fighting against the terrors of life and becoming something inspiring, something that people for Japan can root for. I mean, he was such an influential character, Joe, that they had multiple commemorations for them, and they actually held a funeral for him after he died in different provinces in Japan. Which the only other character that I can think about is a character that happened recently, which, if you look at how he looks like, he doesn't look Japanese, unlike Joe. And his name is Gojo from Jujutsu Kaisen. I think you can attest to that, if you remember all the...
No, I don't remember all of it.
Oh, well, I guess that's just a me thing.
Yeah.
Then there's also, on top of that, with Ashista no Joe, there's a remake called Megalobox. You look at both the characters, the character on what I hope is my left, when I'm editing this, but you'll see an older style and a newer style. The newer style, he looks American. He looks sort of like Mexican American or Japanese American. He doesn't look strictly Japanese, like Joe did in Ashista no Joe. Then we also have Devilman. Devilman, the original character, looked like an antsy Japanese character and was dressed like Japanese customs at the time, right? Japanese gangsters. However, in the remake for Netflix called Devilman Crybaby, they dress American, they sing rap, the music they listen to is very Americanized, right, compared to back then, and there's no such scenes where they have rap at all in the original. It wasn't really a thing. However, it was in the Crybaby one, Devilman Crybaby, which was released in 2018, and the original was released in 1972. And the characters in the story all look Japanese, not compared to now. I think you can name multiple examples of characters that don't look Japanese even though they're in Japan.
Every anime airing this season and last season and like the 3 seasons before that, basically. Pick one and then there you go.
I'll have a blonde character.
Every blonde character in every anime.
And they also wear American clothing. They don't wear like something that an average Japanese would wear. Especially the characters. Even going back to something like Demon Slayer. Yeah, some of them look Japanese, but some of them you look at them as like, there's no way that guy's Japanese.
Yeah.
This was set back in I think
pre-Meiji period.
Yeah, pre-Meiji period of Japan. So that's really goddamn old. And
no, they were set as the Meiji period was happening.
Maybe it was late 1800s.
Oh yeah, like around the Meiji era.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then we also have a show that just many people have very dear to their heart, which is Dragon Ball. Which is where really all this start of characters not looking not looking Japanese, and looking more Western and American, really started. You look at any character from Dragon Ball, they look European. They don't look anything like American. Or sorry, not American. They don't look anything like Japanese. You have characters that are taller, are more built, facial structures, instead of being like smaller eyes and things like that, they have more like American eyes, more American type
slimmer
muscles.
faces.
Yeah,
and
slimmer.
Like that.
Yeah, it's really where it all started, and there's also things like Bleach that really none of the characters look Japanese, minus like I could think like 2, and none of them are really Japanese, and these are like what Japanese people have been able to like model themselves over. I guess one of the few examples would be Naruto.
Yeah.
I think Naruto, most of them look Japanese.
Yeah. And if you think about it now, there's also like fashion as well.
Yeah.
Because like traditional like Japanese like style of clothing
Yeah.
has basically died out except for like religious holidays. While most people now they import like Louis Vuitton and Gucci and all the luxury brands from the West.
Oh yeah, yeah. And I want to talk about also inspirations for Dragon Ball that also transferred to other fictions. Dragon Ball was heavily inspired by martial artists like Bruce Lee's movies, like Wrath of the Dragon. Pretty sure that's what it's called.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a very big inspiration for some of the martial arts in there, Or Muhammad Ali. There's literally characters that fight like Muhammad Ali in this series. And they're built very... There's a character also that looks like a pro wrestler, right? These aren't Japanese body builds. And most of... Oh, there's also Fist of the North Star. You know what Fist of the North Star is? Right?
No. Enlighten me.
Do you know what... You know how JoJo's characters look?
Yeah.
From part 1 to part 3, those are inspired by Fist of the North Star. They basically look like carbon copies. Those very large muscles, very American-looking faces, very like baggy punk clothes or like very tight clothes, right? All of that was actually a parody of Fist of the North Star until like part 3 and part 4 in JoJo's. So that's what those characters look like.
I see.
I'll actually show you just a picture. Here we go. And I'll also show the people at home a picture. Here.
Oh yeah.
Have you seen a more American person than that?
It looks something like out of it's like a mix between like a 70s like greaser that's like really buff.
Yeah.
It looks like a 70s like greaser from like New York who's like just extremely buff.
Yeah. And I will say one more thing that I wanted to bring up actually is about, I think the only manga that will ever be able to outsell comics that I've literally outsold. It's outsold Batman and it's about to outsell Superman in comics. It's One Piece. All the characters in One Piece all have different nationalities. Sanji, the cook, is French. Luffy is Brazilian. I have it here, yeah. Nami is Sweden. Robin is Russia. Frankie, again, another character that looks very American, is also American. And they all have different nationalities. Something you would have never seen in previous medias before our influence, really.
Yeah, because we sort of opened them up because they're a very closed nation. Even in the very beginning, like with the time of Emperor Meiji, Japan was a closed nation until America came with Commodore Perry and opened it up for the first time. And then we had like a sort of second opening with the end of World War II. There's a moral cultural influence too, for example, like music, for example.
Oh yeah, that's literally what we're going to talk about next, which is a perfect segue. And you know what else is a perfect segue? To our sponsor, 10-year shelf life.
Brought to you by Tetra Pak. 10 years. When the apocalypse happens, you get thirsty.
And you're going to need hydration and clean water. Okay, so back to the topic at hand.
We gotta keep the lights on.
Lights are already off. What are you talking about?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, the music industry is a very interesting thing because if you look at what Japanese music looked like before America, sounds nothing alike. I mean, one of the most popular genres right now is J-pop.
Which is just pop music.
Yeah, which is literally just pop music that was mostly like inspired by things like Prince, I think. Yeah, Prince, Michael Jackson, Elvis Presley, the Beatles. The Beatles was also a big inspiration, like it was to the rest of the world. And they were also really, really inspired by rock and roll with all the punk music. And disco.
Japanese punk bands are really massive too.
Yeah, Japanese punk bands. There's also Japanese rock, which is called J-rock. Really, I don't know why Americans classify these with just J to represent Japan. And I mean, if you want to know what it looked like before the war, right? The composers were mainly like Shiko. Sakoyaku-ka, in which the composers were mostly modern and instrumental, like modern most of expressions most of the time, right? And instrumental, yeah, basically classical music, or well, not exactly like American classical music, but classical Japanese music, very Asian cultured, not very like super expressive or anything. However, if you look nowadays, like literally city pop alone, right? Just city pop.
was huge in like the 80s.
Yeah, it's huge in the 80s, and let me tell you all the subcategories of city pop. We have funk, we have disco, we have R&B, we have soft rock, and boogie, which are mostly from America and the Western world. Specifically, half of those were mostly inspired by African Americans.
Yeah, like boogie, for example.
Yeah, and they also have techno music, which is another influence from America. And all of this was basically just America taking not only just the whole just Japan, but literally the whole wide world. If you look at different artists, you could probably say Michael Jackson anywhere in Africa, anywhere in Europe, anywhere in India, and he's still just as big.
Yeah.
And nowadays, I think the most common example would sadly be Taylor Swift.
The modern day example.
Yeah.
And another thing is, with a lot of songs, including like, for example, city pop and J-pop, they'll include just English lyrics, and including in other countries, like European countries, there'll be English lyrics in the middle of their songs.
I mean, I think Beastars is a perfect example, which is an anime opening. Yeah, it literally has straight up English lyrics.
Plastic Love as well.
Also, another big influence would be rap artists like Tupac. I know that, and I think Drake. I think Drake was also
an influence. There's a lot of J-rap too. Yeah,
there's a lot of J-rap.
Straight pulled from America, basically.
Yeah, it's like it's straight pulled from hip hop. If you look at a song from Japan that's J rap, and you look at a song from America that's just rap, it has the same rhythm, has the same like rhyming scheme and everything. Now this is a topic that you basically know nothing about. I know a lot about. So we're gonna go on to the sports industry.
Yeah,
which is baseball. It's the biggest sport in Japan, and it's not even close. I kept this away from you because I wanted to see your reaction.
Oh.
So, in Japan alone, right? I'm not joking when I say this. The Nippon, so let's see. The Nippon Pro Baseball Association is around 1 billion USD. That is the estimated cost if you want to buy the Nippon Pro Baseball Association.
It's $1 billion organization.
Yeah, it's $1 billion USD organization, not a billion yen. In comparison, Japan's national sport, which is sumo wrestling, can you just guess a number?
70 million?
It's 100 million.
Oh,
it is literally 1/10 of how big baseball is. Now, baseball and Japan go hand in hand. The reason why so many people actually fell in love with the sport is because they came from America in around the 19th century, right? Same area, right? And fell in love with the sport. So they introduced it to Japan. Those same people took government positions and started to influence the sport. Baseball started at schools in 1872, and the first adult baseball team was established in 1878. Then, baseball exploded in popularity when a high school team beat a team of foreigners. And those players were seen as heroes. This was between like the era of 1880 and World War I.
Pre-war, basically.
Yeah, pre-World War I. By 1920, professional baseball started. But it wasn't until 1934 where the Greater Japan Tokyo Baseball Club starts. And both Japan and the United States face off.
Did Japan win?
No.
Oh.
And
we still got them back then.
Not now, though.
I know.
In 1936, the first professional league was formed, like professional. And in 1950, it was so large, it split into two, which was the Central and Pacific League, with both of them together being called the Nippon Professional Baseball League, which is what I told you about, which is now,
modern day, basically.
Yeah. The way that the teams are named are by the owner and the geographical province.
The prefectures, basically.
Yep. This sport has many correlations with Japan's lifestyle, with their way that they stress about group identity, cooperation, their hard work, the seniority, and respect for others, which was actually said by basically like a writer called Robert Whiting. Japan has such a great baseball team that they have won the World Baseball Classic, which is basically every single team in the world competes for each other 3 times.
Like the World Cup, basically, of basketball.
Yeah, no, not a basketball.
Or baseball,
Yeah.
baseball.
3 times. And the craziest part is that they've all been in the 2000s, the 3 times that they've won. They won 2006, 2009, and 2023, in which they beat the United States. And I think what's crazy about that is that the viewership for that was an average of 4.84 million views, which was the largest ever in the World Classic viewership. Largest ever. An average between the entire series, right? And the only thing that compares to that in the last 4, like compares to that, right, is one game in the past, I think, yeah, it's past 13 years. Also, it was 4.88 million viewers. Got my numbers a little bit mixed up there. Yeah, and it was only eclipsed by one regular season game in the MLB for the past 13 years, which is nuts. That is,
Their viewership is just massive.
yeah, especially for something that's not specifically in America, because the largest organizations half the time for like these American sports is in America.
Yeah.
There's no larger.
That's where the money is.
Yeah, there's no larger corporation than the NFL, the NBA, even the EuroLeague versions of both of those. Not even close to the amount of profit that they make. I mean, you could just tell by just the salary that they earn.
Yeah.
And yeah, literally, if you want to see the steady decline in comparison, the World Series, which I think is a terrible name to call the MLBs, for the past 18 years has never reached, sorry, no, that's a lie, has only reached one time over 20 million viewers. However, during the 1970s, the mid-1970s to the 1990s, there wasn't a single year where it was below 20 million. The last 4 years of the MLB has the lowest viewership for a World Series ever throughout all of its history, which just shows the gradual falling off of the sport. Now, Japan has also seen like a loss of fans, but this is also just like a survey thing. This doesn't have like a lot of backing to it, which was around 31.3 million in 2014 and around 21.16 million in 2023. But that was, I'm pretty sure, before the World Finals, right? Or the World Cup, technically, of baseball. And to be honest, this is not really too surprising, mostly because Japan's population has just been decreasing and because of COVID.
Yeah, you can't go out to watch the game.
Yeah, COVID completely destroyed half of these sports, right?
Across the world.
Yeah, across the world. That's not even just like and maybe minus like soccer and the NBA. Those are like the only two that really have recovered really well. But there was also a 2 million drop off just between 2014 and 2022, and it's becoming an exceedingly prevalent issue in Japan. Their fertility rates are considerably down over the past 10 years. Okay, and now let's go back to a session that you actually know.
Oh, joy.
You want to talk about KFC?
I love Kentucky Fried Chicken. Colonel Sanders.
Yeah. So you want to talk about it?
I mean, it's like a crazy phenomenon. If you're like in Japan around like December, you just see like wooden or cardboard cutouts of just like Colonel Sanders and like Christmas, like dressed as Santa. Basically, he is Santa Claus.
He is Santa in Japan,
and it's like you have to make reservations to get your get your KFC like 3 months in advance. In like October, you're like, let me go pre-order my KFC.
I need my KFC.
It's like
for Christmas.
Pre-order my. They sell cakes and stuff too for.
No, it's called the Party Barrel.
Yeah.
That's exactly what they sell. So, you want to hear something crazy about that?
Yeah,
In 2019, 5% of the company's revenue was just Christmas Eve.
What's their annual revenue?
Around 563 million. So
5% of that?
it's around 28 million.
Yeah, about so. Yeah.
Around 28 million, which is crazy. If any company had one day in America where they made 5% of their revenue,
If they made $28 million in a day,
that's not too crazy for a super large corporate.
Amazon and Google could probably do that in a day, but
Yeah, but it's just like 5% of their revenue, not just like 5% in total. The thing is, you also got to remember this is using American dollars, not yen. Not yen. Okay. And it's also KFC's considerably cheaper in Japan. If KFC was the same price as it is here in America, that would probably be like 10%.
oh yeah, and that's like KFC International. That's like still like a huge market share right there, and they basically
It's the third largest
it's the third largest.
of all. The only one that's larger is, of course, the United States.
And they cornered
and China.
And China. Yeah, I mean that makes sense. They cornered the market in Japan basically though.
Yeah.
They like no other company in Japan has like such brand recognition during Christmas.
Yeah, none. No, we're talking about specifically during Christmas, and on
Like-
top of that, so you want to hear some of the history?
Sure.
So first, let's go on with the fact that 70% of their sales are takeouts, for party occasions, special occasions, right? Which is mostly due because of the Christmas craving, right? Christmas craving was very important. Originally, they decided to open in like suburban areas at the time, which was like Osaka and Nagoya. But it didn't really pan out as they lost 100 million yen, which I think at that point would have been should have been around 10 to 20 million, because the USD yen conversion was pretty similar. It was like 100 yen to like $1.20. Yeah. So it's like when they decided to go to urban areas like Kobe in Japan, it was a massive success. I mean, they had literally just 100 million outlets open the first year of operation. Then Colonel Sanders himself went to visit Japan in 1972, 1978, and 1980. They are the largest single foreign market in Japan by 1983, with over 390 outlets and slightly under 300 million in sales. In 1990, KFC Japan was on the Tokyo Stock Exchange, and because of the 1980s boom in Japan, they grew to
economic miracle.
Yeah, they grew to 1,000 outlets and 1.2 billion American dollars in annual sales in 1993. However, in 2000s, they basically were sold mostly to Mitsubishi,
the car company that makes basically everything.
Oh no, wait, they weren't sold for, and they had sales of 600 million in 2000, and were sold for 14.83 billion yen.
They bought majority control. They bought 51%.
Yeah. Now, I want to talk about specifically Christmas. Christmas was actually because of the first ever KFC that was managed by Takashi Okawara. As a substitute for the American turkey, right, that was mostly advertised in America for Christmas, they basically said that Americans had fried chicken for Christmas. And Christmas was not really that big in Japan. They had no real traditions tied to it. So basically, they just took the market by storm. They basically marketed all the market barrels, all like the party barrels, as like a substitute, and were just like, this is what Americans have on Christmas.
That's another thing with the Americanization. Christmas itself.
Yeah, Christmas wasn't a thing in Japan before us.
Christians were originally persecuted, and now Christmas is like one of their largest holidays, right next to Golden Week, basically.
Yeah, and New Year's.
Yeah, Golden Week, New Year's, and Christmas, basically.
Yeah, I mean, and specifically in 1974, the campaign that they run is literally called Kentucky for Christmas, or Kentucky Christmas, right? In which, from then on, after that point of 1974, Christmas was now a complete staple of Japan.
Advertising goes crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now that we've gone over our topics for the day, what are your final thoughts on how much over the years America has influenced their culture, their politics, and their food?
I mean, they're basically like a satellite state at this point, like in terms of culture. Because like even like they switched from teaching like as like secondary like education. They switched from like stuff like piano and piano and all this other extra.
Yeah, martial arts.
Yeah, they switched to English proficiency.
Yeah. Oh.
Children nowadays, they're just like English second language, please.
Yeah, no, and also English is one of the biggest languages in the world at this point, minus Mandarin. And also the universal language is English.
Yeah.
In the internet. Not only that, right? With Japan, like their students specifically are exposed to American culture 24/7 because if they have any professor that is an English professor, it is going most of the time to be either American
or British.
And a majority of that stake is America. You know why? Because Americans want to go over there to spend basically some time studying because of what Japan is, right? And because of that, they'll teach students.
Yeah,
and there's been so many cases. It's literally forced in the Japanese curriculum to take English.
Yeah.
Which isn't just American.
And then after school, they'll go back to supplement English lessons as well.
It's crazy. I mean, probably in the next 10, 15 years, I would not be surprised if most in Japan...
Dual language country.
Yeah, becomes a dual language country of English. And there's multiple countries that are like that. Puerto Rico, probably the next...
Not really a country, but you know.
Yeah, territory. But
European countries, English is also pretty widely spoken throughout all of them.
Yeah, literally throughout all of them, more than Spanish or French.
Yeah.
Or German. So it's just... I personally think the way they did it, like I said earlier, I think it's completely unique. It's nothing like I've ever seen before. I don't think I've seen any other country be so influenced by American culture and because of the Japanese. Because think about it like this: the art forms, yes, they were influenced by Americans, but it was the Japanese who took those art forms and adapted it into their stories.
And it's like we weren't constantly supervising them. Occupation ended after like 20 years.
Yeah, no, like I said, that's what I'm saying. Like it was kind of like you know how like a child looks at like their old, like let's say like their parents for guidance, kind of like that. Where they just kind of just took our stuff that they listened to on the radio,
took what they liked.
Yeah, took what they liked and then ran with it. Not only did they ran with it, they also added on to it and made their own subgenres. Mm-hmm. That were based off American concepts, like with music, with the arts. Like I'm saying, like most of the characters don't look Japanese. They don't. But that's not because we told them, hey, those characters have to look American. We didn't say anything over that. They just decided to make them look more Western because of like people like Akira Toriyama and Fist of the North Star.
It's what people gained interest in. So like they adopted aspects of our culture.
Yeah, which I think is very different because America had adopted a lot of British culture, but that was because a lot of British immigrants came in. Japan, they're very xenophobic. They're very afraid of other countries. There was not a very large stake of Americans there. However, we influenced them greatly. Things like the Terminator, American comics. I mean, hell,
the music, the language.
Yeah, the music, the
language.
Food, I mean, katakana, which is literally a Japanese version of of our language. Most of the time, the katakana, which is just hiragana, right? Hiragana is usually most for things like kanji, but katakana is used mostly to describe English words.
Yeah,
Ensuru is not written in hiragana, it's written in katakana.
Yeah, it's phonetically spelled out.
Yeah. There's many words like that in Japan.
And a lot of modern terminology is just ripped straight from English.
Yeah. Literally ripped straight from English, but when you actually write it down, it's in a different language that they use to put those words in.
Yeah, it's using one of the 3 alphabets.
So would you agree with my original statement?
Yeah, honestly, yeah.
Yeah? Okay, well, with that, we're going to end the podcast, and I hope all you beautiful people that are watching this have a great day. Peace.